The champagne flutes clinked around me as Manhattan's art elite mingled beneath the exposed brick and track lighting. I smoothed down my navy dress, the one I'd bought from Macy's clearance rack specifically for tonight. At 72, my hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and the small tremor had gotten worse since David died 7 years ago. "Mrs. Chen, would you like to sit down?" A young gallery assistant noticed me gripping my clutch a little too tightly. "There are chairs in the back room." "No, thank you, dear. I wouldn't miss this for the world." I smiled, tucking a strand of silver hair behind my ear. 27 years of watching Sophie grow up had led to this moment. Her first solo exhibition at the Hartwick Gallery in Soho. My granddaughter, an actual artist with her name on the door. When Sophie was born, I held her in my arms at St. Luke's Hospital and made a promise. My son David's daughter would have every opportunity to chase her dreams, no matter what it took. David had died when Sophie was 15, a sudden heart attack that left us all shattered. His wife Linda had struggled, or so I thought at the time. I'd stepped in immediately, moving Sophie into my small apartment in Flushing, Queens. I still remember that first night, Sophie crying herself to sleep in David's old bedroom. The room I'd kept exactly as he'd left it, with his basketball trophies and comic book collection. I sat on the edge of her bed and whispered, "Your father would want you to keep dreaming, sweetheart. What do you dream about?" "I want to paint," she'd said through tears. "Like Frida Kahlo, like Yayoi Kusama. But Mom says art school is for rich kids who can afford to fail." Linda had been practical, I'd give her that. She'd remarried within a year, a dentist from Westchester with a steady income and traditional views about real careers. Sophie had visited them on weekends, but she'd lived with me. While Linda pushed for Sophie to major in business or pre-law, I quietly encouraged the sketchbooks that piled up on our kitchen table. When Sophie got accepted to the School of Visual Arts, the tuition bill made me dizzy. $60,000 a year. I was living on my late husband Robert's pension and Social Security, barely making ends meet in our rent-controlled apartment. But I'd made a promise. Robert had left me one thing of real value, his classic car collection. 5 pristine vehicles from the 1960s, each one a memory of our life together. The '67 Mustang we'd driven to Atlantic City on our honeymoon. The '64 Corvette he'd restored in our garage, spending every weekend for 3 years getting it perfect. The '69 Camaro he'd taught David to drive in. These weren't just cars, they were our history. I called Bernie's Classic Auto Gallery in Newark. "I need to sell them," I'd said, my voice cracking. "All 5. Quickly." Bernie had been Robert's friend for 40 years. "Maggie, are you sure? Robert loved these cars more than anything except you and David. David's gone. But his daughter needs a future. This is what Robert would want." The collection sold for $240,000. Enough for all 4 years of art school, with some left over for supplies and rent. Sophie had cried when I told her, insisting it was too much, that she'd find another way. But I was firm. This was happening. Those 4 years flew by in a blur of sacrifices I never mentioned to Sophie. I stopped taking my blood pressure medication to save money, $200 a month I could send her instead for canvas and paint. I took on alterations. Work at the dry cleaner down the street. My arthritic fingers pushing needles through fabric for $10 an hour. When Sophie called home excited about a summer program in Florence, I told her I'd handle it, then pawned my engagement ring to cover the $3,000 fee. Now, watching the crowd admire her paintings, bold, beautiful pieces that combined Chinese calligraphy with contemporary portraiture, I felt my chest swell with pride. She'd done it. Despite losing her father, despite Linda's doubts, despite everything, my Sophie was an artist. The gallery owner, a stick-thin woman named Clarissa, clinked her glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Our extraordinary artist, Sophie Chen, would like to say a few words." Sophie stepped forward, stunning in a black dress I'd never seen before, probably borrowed or bought for the occasion. Her dark hair was swept up, her makeup flawless. She looked nothing like the grief-stricken 15-year-old who'd moved into my apartment. She looked like she belonged here, among these people with their designer shoes and art world connections. "Thank you all so much for coming," Sophie began, her voice steady and confident. "This exhibition is called Inherited Spaces, And it's about the rooms we occupy, the memories we carry, and the people who shape us. My eyes welled up. I knew these paintings. Each one depicted a room from our apartment, the kitchen where we'd eaten countless dinners, the tiny bathroom where I'd taught her to do a proper skincare routine, the living room where we'd watched old movies together. I wouldn't be here without some very important people, Sophie continued. I started to move forward slightly, ready for her acknowledgement. After all, hadn't I been there for everything? Every late-night crisis, every rejection letter, every triumph? First, I want to thank my mother, Linda, for giving me the stability to pursue my dreams. I blinked. Linda? Linda who'd told Sophie that art was frivolous? Linda who'd barely visited during those 4 years? And most importantly, Sophie's voice grew emotional. I want to thank the woman who believed in me from the very beginning, the woman who saw my potential when I was just a struggling student with big dreams, the woman responsible for who I am today as an artist. My heart soared. Finally, the recognition I'd never asked for but secretly hoped. Victoria Sterling, would you please stand? The room erupted in applause as an elegant woman in her 50s rose from her seat near the front. Designer dress, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, diamonds at her throat that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Victoria Sterling, the famous curator who'd discovered emerging artists for the Metropolitan Museum, Sophie continued, her eyes shining as she looked at Victoria. Victoria took a chance on an unknown artist 3 years ago. She mentored me, introduced me to her connections, and made tonight possible. Victoria, you changed my life. I stood frozen, invisible among the crowd of well-dressed strangers. 3 years ago? That was Sophie's junior year. When I'd been sending her money for supplies, she'd been… What? Building relationships with Victoria Sterling? The woman next to me turned, smiling politely. Are you with the artist? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Across the room, Sophie was hugging Victoria, both of them beaming. Several people approached them, offering congratulations. Linda appeared from somewhere in the crowd when had she even arrived, and joined the embrace, laughing like she'd been part of this journey all along. I'm just an admirer of the work, I finally managed to say. The woman nodded and turned away. Just another face in the crowd. That's what I'd become. 27 years reduced to a stranger at my own granddaughter's triumph. I looked down at my hands, rough and calloused from years of alteration work, trembling slightly from skipped medication. These hands had held Sophie when she cried for her father. These hands had signed away Robert's beloved cars. These hands had sewn until midnight to earn extra money for her supplies. In that moment, I felt something inside me crack. But I also felt something else ignite a quiet fury that came from knowing your truth, even when everyone else seemed to have forgotten it. I took a deep breath and started moving through the crowd toward the center of the room. My legs felt unsteady, but I kept walking. People parted slightly, curious about this older Asian woman making her way forward with determination. Excuse me, I said, my voice cutting through the congratulatory chatter. I have something to say. Sophie turned, her face draining of color as she recognized me. Grandma. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I'm Sophie's grandmother, Margaret Chen, and I need to correct something. The room fell silent. Victoria Sterling's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly. Linda's smile froze on her face. 3 years ago, I continued, looking directly at Sophie, you weren't being mentored by Victoria Sterling. 3 years ago, you were calling me every week, crying because you couldn't afford canvas. You were living in my apartment during summer break because you couldn't afford rent. You were wearing my altered clothes because you couldn't afford new ones. Mrs. Chen, Victoria interjected smoothly, I don't think this is the appropriate. I sold my late husband's classic car collection, I said, not breaking eye contact with Sophie. Every single car. The '67 Mustang from our honeymoon. The Corvette he spent 3 years restoring. The Camaro he taught Sophie's father to drive in. $240,000. That's what paid for the School of Visual Arts. That's what paid for the Florence summer program. That's what bought the supplies for every single painting in this gallery. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, Please. I'm not looking for gratitude, I said, and I meant it. I'm just not going to be erased. Not tonight. Not after everything. Linda stepped forward, her face flushed. Margaret, you're making a scene. This is Sophie's night. You're right. It is Sophie's night, I agreed. But it's built on more than connections and mentorship. It's built on sacrifice she seems to have forgotten. Or perhaps never knew about. I pulled something from my clutch, a folded piece of paper, worn from being touched and refolded many times. Sophie's face went pale as she recognized it. Do you remember this? I asked, unfolding it. You drew it when you were 16, a year after your father died. It's a sketch of me, sitting in our kitchen. You wrote on the back, Grandma, when I'm a famous artist, I'll buy you a house so you never have to worry about rent again. You're the only one who believes in me. I'd kept it all these years, tucked into my wallet, pulling it out whenever the alteration work made my fingers ache too badly, whenever skipping medication made me dizzy. It had gotten me through. The room was completely silent now. Even the gallery staff had stopped moving. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. How did you... I didn't know you kept that. I kept everything, I said softly. Every sketch you gave me, every report card, every acceptance letter, every rejection. I kept it all because being your grandmother raising you after your father died, that was the greatest honor of my life. Victoria Sterling cleared her throat uncomfortably. Several people in the crowd looked at her with new understanding. One man near the back said loudly enough for everyone to hear, Classic Manhattan art world bullshit. The real patron gets erased while the connected curator takes credit. That's not fair, Victoria protested. I did mentor Sophie. I made introductions. With whose art? I asked. Art bought with whose money? Mrs. Sterling, I don't doubt you helped my granddaughter. But let's be clear about the foundation that help was built on. A woman I recognized from earlier, the one who'd asked if I was with the artist, approached me now and took my hand. Mrs. Chen, I'm Rachel Morrison, art critic for The Times. Would you be willing to talk to me about your story? Before I could answer, Linda intervened, her voice sharp. This is completely inappropriate. Margaret, you're embarrassing Sophie. No, Sophie said suddenly, her voice stronger than before. She wiped her eyes and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd started speaking. No, Grandma's right. I need to explain something. Everyone, please. Can we have a moment? The crowd began to disperse slightly, though clearly no one wanted to miss what happened next. Clarissa, the gallery owner, looked torn between protecting her artist and honoring the dramatic revelation that was probably going to make this opening the talk of the art world. Sophie walked over to me, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. Up close, I could see she'd been crying behind the confident facade. Her makeup was smudged at the corners. Grandma, she said quietly, can we talk? Privately? Please? I think we're past privacy, don't you? I replied, echoing words from a lifetime ago when I'd caught her trying to hide a failed exam. But seeing her face so much like David's, so much pain in her eyes, I softened. But yes, we can talk. Clarissa quickly ushered us into a small office at the back of the gallery. Sophie closed the door, and suddenly it was just us, like it had been for 12 years. Just Sophie and Grandma. I'm sorry, Sophie said immediately. God, Grandma, I'm so sorry. It's not what you think. Then explain it to me, I said, sitting down in the chair by the desk. My legs were shaking now, adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Explain how Victoria Sterling became the woman responsible for who you are. Sophie sank to the floor, sitting cross-legged like she used to do in our apartment when we'd have our serious talks. Mom told me not to mention the money. She said it would make me look. She said people in the art world would think I was privileged, that I bought my way in. Linda said that? 3 years ago, when I first started getting attention for my work, Victoria did reach out. She saw my pieces at a student show and wanted to mentor me. It was real, Grandma. She really did help me make connections. But Mom convinced me that if anyone knew about the car collection, about the money, they'd think I wasn't a real artist, that I was just some rich kid playing at art with her grandmother's money. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I still didn't understand. So you just erased me? Made me invisible? No, Sophie's voice broke. I never wanted to erase you. But Mom said, She said you would understand, that you'd want me to succeed. And in this world, the story matters as much as the art. She said the story of struggling artist mentored by famous curator was better than granddaughter funded by grandmother's sacrifice. Your mother said a lot of things, apparently. Sophie wiped her eyes again. There's more, Grandma. Things I didn't know until recently. Things Mom never told me. Before she could continue, the office door opened and Linda walked in without knocking. Sophie, people are asking where you are. This is your big night, honey. Let's not let family drama ruin it. I stood up, facing my daughter-in-law. Family drama? Is that what you call it when your daughter publicly denies the person who raised her? Linda's expression hardened. You raised her because I couldn't afford to, Margaret. David died and left me with nothing. I had to rebuild my life, find a new husband, create stability. You volunteered to take Sophie. Don't act like you're a martyr now. I never asked for martyrdom, just acknowledgement. You want acknowledgement? Linda laughed bitterly. Fine. You sold Robert's cars. Yes, we all know. You've been holding that over Sophie's head for 4 years. I never mentioned it once, I said quietly. Not once did I ask her to thank me. Not once did I make her feel guilty. Unlike some people who constantly reminded their daughter that art is for rich people. Sophie stood up. Mom, stop. Grandma, there's something you need to know about the money. We both turned to look at her. Sophie took a deep breath. The car collection sold for $240,000, right? Enough for all 4 years of tuition plus expenses. But Grandma, did you know that tuition at SVA is partially covered by grants and scholarships? I got a merit scholarship that covered 40%. You didn't need to sell all the cars. You didn't need to give me all that money. I stared at her. What? But you never said. Because I didn't know, Sophie said, looking at Linda. Not until last month. Mom told me the scholarship only covered books. She said I needed every penny of the $240,000. But when I was filling out paperwork for this gallery show, I looked at my old financial aid documents. The scholarship covered $24,000 a year. I only needed about $130,000 total from you, the rest. Mom, where did the other $110,000 go? The room went silent. Linda's face had gone from red to pale. That's ridiculous. The money went to your expenses. Rent, supplies. I lived with Grandma every summer and most winters. I barely spent anything on rent, and my supply costs were maybe $2,000 a year. Sophie's voice was shaking now. Mom? I looked at the bank statements. Grandma set up that account in my name, but you had access as the secondary. There were withdrawals. Regular withdrawals of $2,000 to $3,000. What were they for? How dare you accuse me? Where's the money, Linda? I asked, my voice cold. Linda's eyes darted between us. Then, like a cornered animal, she attacked. You want to know where the money went? Fine. It went to pay off David's debts, medical bills from his heart attack, credit cards he'd maxed out that you never knew about. Your precious son wasn't the perfect husband you thought he was, Margaret. He left me drowning in debt. And yes, I used some of Sophie's money to survive. I had no choice. Sophie's face crumbled. Dad had debts? You never told me. Because you worshipped him. Just like Margaret worshipped him. Perfect David, who could do no wrong. But he was irresponsible with money. And I was left to clean up his mess. So yes, I took some of the money. I earned it for dealing with his failures. The slap of Linda's words hung in the air. Part of me wanted to defend David, to explain that he'd been young when he died, that we all make financial mistakes. But I was too focused on the larger truth. You took over $100,000 of money meant for your daughter's education, I said slowly. Money I got by selling my late husband's most precious possessions. And then you convinced Sophie to hide the source of her funding because it would make her look privileged? I gave her a strategy for success, Linda snapped. The art world is about connections and perception. Victoria Sterling's endorsement is worth more than your old cars ever were. Get out, Sophie said suddenly. What? Get out of this office. Get out of this gallery. Get out of my life. Sophie's voice was shaking but firm. You stole from Grandma. You lied to me. You used Dad's memory to justify it. Get out. Linda's face twisted with rage and something else, fear. Sophie, I'm your mother. And she's my grandmother. The one who was actually there. The one who didn't lie. Get out. Linda looked at me, perhaps hoping for support, but I just stared back at her. After a long moment, she grabbed her designer purse and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Sophie and I stood in silence for a moment. Then she sank back down to the floor, and I joined her, my old knees protesting but managing. Grandma, she whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the money, or the scholarship, or any of it. I believe you, but I still did it. I still let Mom convince me to hide you, to pretend Victoria was the only one who mattered. God. The things I said out there, the woman responsible for who I am today. That should have been you. It was you. I took her hand, the same hand I'd held crossing streets when she was little, the same hand I'd watched learn to hold a paintbrush. Sophie, why did you really do it? The truth. She was quiet for a long time. Because I was ashamed. Of me? Of being poor. Of coming from Queens. Of wearing thrift store clothes while my classmates wore designer everything. Of eating ramen for dinner while they ate at fancy restaurants. Victoria Sterling represents everything I wanted to be: successful, respected, wealthy. You represented everything I was trying to escape from, and I hate myself for feeling that way, but it's the truth. Her honesty cut deep, but I understood it. I'd felt the same way once, decades ago, when I'd first married Robert and moved to America. Ashamed of my accent, my lack of education, my immigrant parents. Your father felt that way too, you know, I said softly. When he was a teenager, he went through a phase where he didn't want me speaking Chinese in front of his friends. He wanted to pretend we were a different kind of family. Sophie looked up, surprised. Dad did that? For about 6 months. Then one day he came home crying. One of his friends had made a racist joke, and David realized that hiding where he came from didn't protect him. It just made him complicit in his own erasure. I squeezed her hand. He learned that our history, even the poor parts, especially the poor parts, that's what makes us strong. Not something to hide. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I know you are. But Sophie, I need to understand something. Tonight, when you thanked Victoria in front of all those people, did you know what that would do to me? She closed her eyes. I knew you were coming tonight. Mom told me to keep it simple, keep it focused on the art world, and like an idiot, I believed her. Or maybe I wanted to believe her because it was easier than facing the truth of what I was doing, which was choosing the easy story over the real one, choosing the version of myself that fit in over the version that was true. We sat there on the office floor, two women who'd lost the same man in different ways, who'd survived together, and were now facing what that survival had cost. The painting of the kitchen, I said finally. In the main gallery. That's our kitchen, isn't it? From the apartment, Sophie nodded. Every painting in this show is a room from your apartment. I called the exhibition Inherited Spaces because those rooms, they shaped everything about who I am. How could I show these paintings and not acknowledge you? That's what I kept asking myself. But Mom kept saying, stop blaming your mother, I interrupted gently. She gave you bad advice, yes. She stole money, yes. But you made your own choices tonight, Sophie. Own them. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I chose wrong. Yes, you did. And now you have to figure out how to make it right. Can I? Can I make this right? I thought about it. Thought about the years of sacrifice, the sold cars, the skipped medication, the late-night sewing. Thought about Sophie's face when she'd thanked Victoria Sterling instead of me. Thought about how much it hurt to be erased. But I also thought about David, holding baby Sophie at the hospital, making me promise to always take care of her. I thought about the countless nights Sophie and I had sat at that kitchen table, her sketching while I sewed, both of us processing grief in our own ways. I thought about love and sacrifice and what it means to raise a child who isn't yours by birth but is yours by choice. I don't know, I said honestly. I don't know if you can make it right, but I know you can try. There was a soft knock on the door. Clarissa poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sophie, there are a lot of people asking for you. And, Mrs. Chen, there's a man here who says he knows you? Bernie something? He said he saw the commotion and wanted to check if you were okay. Bernie, Robert's old friend, the one who'd bought the car collection. I hadn't seen him since the sale 3 years ago. Tell him I'll be out in a minute, I said. Clarissa nodded and left. Sophie stood up, offering me her hand to help me rise. My knees cracked in protest, but I made it to my feet. What are you going to do? Sophie asked. I'm going to go see an old friend. What are you going to do? Sophie looked at the door leading back to the gallery, where her future waited collectors, critics, Victoria Sterling's connections, all of it. Then she looked at me. I'm going to tell the truth, she said. All of it. About the cars, about the money, about you. Even if it ruins the narrative Mom wanted. Even if it makes me look, whatever it makes me look like, I'm going to tell the truth. That'll be uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable for 3 years, Grandma. What's one more night? We walked out of the office together. The gallery had filled even more, apparently word had spread. And nothing draws an art crowd like drama. Bernie stood near the entrance, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw me. Maggie Chen, he said warmly. Still causing trouble. I see. Bernie, what are you doing here? I collect contemporary art now. Who knew? He gestured to Sophie's paintings. Your granddaughter has real talent. Robert would have been proud. He paused. I heard what happened. The whole room heard. You okay? I'm still standing. That's my Maggie. He looked at Sophie, who stood uncertainly beside me. You're the artist. You've got your grandmother's fire. I can see that. But kid, that speech you gave, that wasn't fire. That was someone trying to put it out. Sophie flinched, but nodded. I know. I'm about to fix it. Good. Bernie turned back to me. Maggie, I actually came here for another reason. I need to talk to you about the car collection. My heart sank. Please don't tell me something was wrong with the sale. I can't afford to. No, nothing like that. The opposite, actually. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Remember how I said I'd sell them to collectors and give you the money? Well, I did. But the market's been crazy for classic cars these past few years. I got way more than we expected. And per our agreement, the additional profit goes to you. He handed me the envelope. I opened it and stared at the check inside. $150,000. Bernie, this is. I can't. You can. And you will. Robert's car's appreciated. That's your money, Maggie. Do with it what you want. He glanced at Sophie. Though maybe this time, set up the account in only your name. Sophie's face flushed red, but she didn't argue. She knew she'd lost that right. Bernie kissed my cheek and wandered off to look at paintings, leaving me staring at a check that represented more money than I'd seen in years. Money that could pay for the medication I'd been skipping. Money that could fix the leak in my apartment ceiling. Money that could, well, it could do a lot of things. Sophie was watching me carefully. Grandma, I don't expect. Good. Because you're not getting it. I folded the check and put it back in the envelope. This is mine. Robert's legacy to me. I'll decide what to do with it. She nodded, accepting the boundary. Then she took a deep breath. I'm going to make the speech now. The real one. Will you stay? I looked at my granddaughter, this talented, flawed, scared young woman who'd made a terrible choice but was trying to fix it. I thought about walking away, letting her face this alone. I'd earned that right, but I thought about David again. Take care of her, he'd whispered in the hospital, not knowing he was dying. Promise me, Mom. Take care of my Sophie. I'll stay, I said. But Sophie, this isn't about me forgiving you tonight. That's going to take time. Maybe a long time. This is about you telling your truth. Regardless of who's watching. I understand. Sophie walked back to the center of the gallery, where Clarissa was trying to manage the crowd's energy. Victoria Sterling stood off to the side, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The art critic, Rachel Morrison, had her notebook out. Everyone, Sophie said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I need to say something. The speech I gave earlier, it wasn't complete. It wasn't honest. And if these paintings are about anything, they're about honesty. The room quieted again. People pulled out phones, sensing something significant was about to happen. These paintings, Sophie continued, gesturing to the walls around us, are called inherited spaces. Each one depicts a room from my grandmother's rent-controlled apartment in Flushing, Queens. That kitchen? That's where she taught me to cook Chinese food after my father died. That bedroom? That's where I cried myself to sleep for months, and where she sat with me every single night until I could finally rest. That living room? That's where we watched old movies on her ancient TV, where she sewed alterations for $10 an hour while I did my homework. Victoria Sterling's face was unreadable. Linda was nowhere to be seen. She'd apparently left the gallery. My grandmother, Margaret Chen, sold my late grandfather's entire classic car collection to pay for my education at the School of Visual Arts, Sophie said, her voice stronger now. She sold cars worth $240,000, cars my grandfather had spent decades collecting and restoring, cars that represented their whole life together. She did this without asking for anything in return, without making me feel guilty, without expecting public acknowledgement. People were turning to look at me now. I kept my face neutral. Tonight, I thanked Victoria Sterling for being the woman responsible for who I am. And Victoria did help me. She mentored me, made important introductions, believed in my work. I'm grateful for that, and it's real. Sophie looked at Victoria, who nodded stiffly. But the foundation of everything I am? That was built by my grandmother, in a small apartment in Queens, with sacrifice I didn't fully understand and apparently didn't fully appreciate. Sophie, I said quietly, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Grandma, you were right. I erased you. And I did it because I was ashamed not of you, but of being poor, of struggling, of coming from somewhere that didn't fit the art world's narrative of what an artist should be. She looked around the gallery. But you know what? That shame? That's the art world's problem, not mine. My grandmother worked 3 jobs. She cleaned offices at dawn, worked reception during the day, and did alterations at night. She did that for years, for me, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't happen just because it's not a glamorous story. Rachel Morrison was writing furiously. Several people were openly crying. One collector, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, started clapping. Then another person joined in. Then another. Sophie walked over to me, tears streaming down her face. Grandma, I can't undo what I said. I can't take back making you invisible. But I can tell the truth now. I can make sure everyone knows that these paintings, all of my art, it exists because of you. Because you loved me enough to sacrifice everything. I looked at my granddaughter, seeing both the scared girl who'd lost her father and the woman she was becoming. Could I forgive her? Not tonight. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. But could I see a path forward? Maybe. The painting of the kitchen, I said, loud enough for the nearby people to hear. You got the light wrong. The afternoon sun comes in from the west window, not the east. Sophie blinked, confused by the shift. What? If you're going to paint our life, paint it accurately. The light matters. A slow smile spread across her face as she understood what I was offering. Not forgiveness, not yet, but engagement. A willingness to stay in the conversation. You're right. I'll fix it. Good. Bernie appeared beside me, offering his arm. Maggie, can I buy you a drink? I think you've had enough drama for one night. Bernie, I've had enough drama for several lifetimes. As he led me toward the gallery's small bar area, Sophie returned to answering questions from collectors and critics. I heard her telling the story again about the cars, about the apartment, about me. Getting it right this time. That took guts, Bernie said, handing me a glass of wine. Both of you. She's David's daughter. Guts run in the family. So does stubbornness, apparently. He clinked his glass against mine. Robert would have loved this, you know. The drama, the truth-telling, all of it. He always said the Chen family never did anything quietly. I laughed, surprising myself. No, we never have. We stood there, 2 old friends drinking wine and watching Sophie navigate her new reality. Some collectors were leaving. Apparently the struggling artist with wealthy curator narrative had been more appealing than granddaughter funded by grandmother's sacrifice. But others stayed, asking deeper questions about the paintings, about the spaces they represented. Victoria Sterling approached me, looking genuinely uncomfortable for the first time all night. Mrs. Chen, I owe you an apology. I had no idea about the financial arrangements, or about Linda's manipulation. I genuinely thought I was simply mentoring a talented artist. You were, I said. But you were also enjoying taking credit for the foundation you didn't build. She flinched but nodded. Fair. For what it's worth, Sophie's talent is real. The connections I provided those were earned by her work, not bought. But you're right. I should have asked more questions about where she came from, about who supported her. Yes, you should have. Victoria excused herself, and I watched her make a quiet exit. The art world would talk about this for weeks, the famous curator who got publicly corrected by an elderly grandmother. Part of me felt guilty about that. A smaller part of me felt satisfied. Ready to go? Bernie asked. Actually, I think I'll stay a bit longer. I want to look at the paintings properly. See what Sophie saw in those rooms we shared. Bernie smiled. I'll leave you to it then. Call me if you need anything, Maggie. Anything at all. After he left, I walked slowly through the gallery, really looking at Sophie's work for the first time. Each painting was technically brilliant, but more than that, they captured something true. The kitchen painting showed my small table covered with fabric scraps, my ancient sewing machine in the corner, and through the window, the view of the Queen's Street below. But Sophie had painted it with such warmth, such light, that the poverty I'd always seen was transformed into something else. Home. The bedroom painting showed the narrow space we'd shared, my bed on one side, Sophie's on the other, barely 3 feet between them. But Sophie had painted it during golden hour, that magic moment when the setting sun turned everything beautiful. In her version, our cramped quarters looked cozy, intimate, safe. The living room painting was perhaps the most striking. She'd painted it from her perspective, lying on the floor doing homework, looking up at me on the couch with my sewing. But she'd also painted reflections in the TV screen, memories of movies we'd watched, faces of actors we'd loved, moments we'd shared. It was layered, complex, honest about both the poverty and the love. She sees you, you know. I turned to find Rachel Morrison, the art critic, standing beside me. What? Sophie. In her paintings. She sees you. Look. Rachel pointed to a small detail in the corner of the kitchen, painting my hands, rough and worn, holding a cup of tea. She didn't paint your hands the way artists usually paint hands. She painted them the way someone who loves hands paints them. With all the scars and calluses, with respect for what they've done. I stared at the detail I'd missed before. Rachel was right. Those were my hands, painted with perfect accuracy and something else, reverence. Mrs. Chen, Rachel continued, I'd like to interview you, for my piece in the Times. The story tonight, the truth that came out, it's important. It's about art and money, and who gets credit, and who gets erased. Would you be willing to talk to me? I'm not sure what I'd have to say. You'd have plenty to say. You sold your late husband's car collection for your granddaughter's education. That's a profound act of love and sacrifice. But it's also a commentary on how we value art in this country, on who gets to make art, on what stories we tell about artistic success. I thought about it. Did I want to be the subject of an article in the New York Times? Did I want strangers reading about my sacrifices, my struggles, my pain? But then I thought about all the other grandmothers, all the other parents and caregivers who sacrificed in silence, who worked 3 jobs and sold precious things and skipped medication and did whatever it took, only to be erased from their children's success stories. All right, I said, I'll talk to you. But on one condition. What's that? You also interview Sophie. The real Sophie, not the version she presented tonight. Let her tell her truth too, the shame, the mistakes, all of it. This isn't just my story. Rachel smiled. Deal. As she walked away to find Sophie, I continued my circuit of the paintings. In each one, I found small details, evidence that Sophie had been paying attention all along, even when I thought she'd forgotten where she came from. The crack in the kitchen ceiling I'd been meaning to fix for years. The worn spot on the couch where I always sat. The view from the bathroom window that looked out onto Mrs. Kim's garden next door. Grandma? I turned to find Sophie standing behind me. Mascara stained, but somehow more real than she'd looked all night. Rachel wants to interview us both, she said. Are you okay with that? I already agreed. On the condition that you tell the whole truth. I will, I promise. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. The check Bernie gave you. The $150,000. What are you going to do with it? I thought about all the things I could do. Pay off my apartment and finally own it. Buy proper medical care. Travel somewhere I'd always wanted to go. Or, and this thought surprised me, maybe even buy back one of Robert's cars. Just one. The Mustang. Maybe. The one from our honeymoon. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But it's mine to decide. You understand that? I do. And Grandma? I don't expect anything from you anymore. Not money, not sacrifice, not even forgiveness. I hope that someday, maybe we can rebuild what I broke tonight. I looked at my granddaughter, this flawed and talented and scared young woman, David's daughter, Robert's granddaughter, my Sophie. It'll take time, I said. Months, probably. Maybe longer. I'm hurt, Sophie. Deeply hurt. I know. But I'm also still here. I'm not walking away. That has to count for something. Her face crumpled with relief. It counts for everything. We stood together in front of the kitchen painting, both of us studying the details of a life we'd shared. Around us, the gallery continued to buzz with conversation, with sales, with the machinery of the art world turning. But in this moment, it was just us. The light really is wrong, you know, I said finally. In the painting. I'll fix it. I'll repaint it and make sure it's perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. Sophie nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Truth over perfection, reality over narrative, love over image. 6 months later, I stood in front of a different gallery, this one smaller, in a less trendy neighborhood, but somehow more honest. Sophie had organized an exhibition called Revisions, featuring the repainted kitchen scene alongside the original. The new version showed the light correctly, streaming in from the west window. But she'd also added something new in the reflection of the window. You could see 2 figures, an old woman and a young girl, sitting together at the table. The gallery was packed, but this time with a different crowd. Yes, there were collectors and critics, but there were also people from the neighborhood. Mrs. Kim from next door, the dry cleaner where I'd worked, Bernie with some of his car collector friends, and in the corner, looking uncomfortable but present, Linda and her husband. Sophie had invited her mother, despite everything. She's still my mother, Sophie had explained to me. Even if she did terrible things, I can't erase her any more than I should have erased you. We'd spent those 6 months in family therapy. Me, Sophie, and yes, even Linda. It had been brutally hard. Linda had to face what she'd done, had to acknowledge the theft and the lies and the manipulation. She'd agreed to pay back the money she'd taken in installments she could afford. It would take years, but it was something. Sophie and I had our own work to do. Rebuilding trust isn't quick or easy. There were setbacks, moments when I'd see something that reminded me of that night at the Hartwick Gallery, and the hurt would surge back. Moments when Sophie would catch herself starting to lie or spin a story, then would have to stop and tell the uncomfortable truth instead. But we were trying, and that, I'd learned, was the foundation of real love. Not perfection, not sacrificing until you disappear, but showing up, telling the truth, and doing the hard work of staying in relationship even when it hurts. Speech time, Sophie said, appearing at my side. She looked different now, less polished, more herself. She wore a simple dress from Macy's and had traded her fancy heels for comfortable flats. Will you do it with me? Both of us? Both of us. No more solo narratives. From now on, we tell this story together. We stood at the front of the small gallery, and Sophie took the microphone. Thank you all for coming to Revisions. 6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake. I erased the woman who raised me from my success story. Tonight, I want to introduce you to her properly. This is my grandmother, Margaret Chen. She's the reason I'm an artist. She's the reason I'm standing here. And she's the reason I learned that the hardest revisions we make aren't to our paintings, they're to ourselves. She handed me the microphone. I looked out at the faces, watching us, some familiar, some new, all curious about this story that had become something of a sensation in the art world. I'm not much for speeches, I began, but I'll say this. Raising Sophie after my son died was the hardest thing I've ever done. It cost me money I didn't have, sleep I needed, and things I treasured. But it gave me purpose when I thought I'd lost everything. It gave me a reason to keep going. So when people ask me if I regret selling my husband's cars, the answer is no. Would I do it differently now, knowing what I know? Maybe. I'd set up better protections. I'd ask more questions. I'd be less willing to sacrifice in silence. But I wouldn't change loving this difficult, talented, flawed young woman. She's my granddaughter. That's forever. The applause was warm and genuine. Rachel Morrison's article in the Times had turned our story into something larger, a conversation about art funding, about class in the creative world, about whose sacrifices get acknowledged and whose get erased. But standing there with Sophie, I realized that the public conversation, while important, wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was that Sophie and I were learning to see each other clearly, not as grandmother and grateful granddaughter, not as martyr and beneficiary, but as two whole people who loved each other and were committed to doing better. After the speeches, people came up to talk, to share their own stories of sacrifice and erasure and complicated family love. An older man told me about putting his daughter through medical school by working double shifts for 12 years. A young woman told me about her single father who'd given up his own career to support hers. Stories poured out, each one a reminder that Sophie and I weren't alone in this complicated dance of love and sacrifice and recognition. Bernie bought 3 paintings. For the living room, he explained. Robert would want these in my house. His wife's story, told through his granddaughter's art. It's perfect. As the evening wound down, Sophie found me standing in front of the dual kitchen paintings, the wrong version and the right one, displayed side by side. Which one is better? She asked. I studied both. The original had a certain beauty to it, even with the wrong light. The revision was more accurate, more true, but they were both valuable in their own way, one showing what we'd thought was true, one showing what actually was. They're both part of the story, I said finally. The mistakes and the corrections. That's what revision really is, not erasing what came before, but building on it, learning from it. Sophie took my hand, rough and worn from years of work, but still strong. Thank you, Grandma, for everything, for raising me, for calling me out, for not giving up on me even when I gave you every reason to. Well, I said, squeezing back, that's what grandmothers do. We love you through your mistakes, even the really big ones. We stood there together, 2 women looking at paintings of a small kitchen in Queens, seeing not poverty but richness, not sacrifice but love, not erasure but truth finally told. And outside, the New York City night buzzed on, full of stories waiting to be painted, revised, and told honestly whatever the cost.